Deus Ex Mankind Divided, will it be shit?
Let's find out.
So this is going to be by Eidos Montreal. This is the same developer as the previous Deus Ex game, Human Revolution. They're a Canadian development house. In 2011, Human Revolution was released. It did really well, actually, on Metacritic. Scored a Metacritic average of 90% amongst the critics.
Very strong.
Very strong, yeah. 84% amongst the users. The slight downtick in user results is pretty attributable to the boss battle cock-up, by which I mean in Deus Ex. Deus Ex is a game that gives you a lot of ways to play. Do you want to be the guy that sneaks through the missions? Do you want to be the guy that runs around with a machine gun? Do you want to be the guy that talks himself through situations? Deus Ex is that game. But with Human Revolution, they outsourced the boss battles to a third party, and this third party made it so that with the boss battles you had to kill the bosses. And so all the people who had previously played Deus Ex games, they were obviously annoyed by the fact that even if they were going for a no-kill playthrough, they still had to have a big fight with the bosses. And the biggest problem with that is, of course, you can spec your character. You have tech trees and so forth. So if you've spec'd your character into a stealthy, sneaky, or charismatic fellow,
prepared to
exactly. So you
battle the boss.
Yeah. So you need to build into the combat skills in order to be successful with the boss battles. Eidos Montreal had a second game in 2013. They were responsible for the multiplayer component of Tomb Raider. I would say this was probably a less successful entry on their CV. I didn't think much to the multiplayer of Tomb Raider, to be honest.
No.
The single player was flawed enough, and then the multiplayer was even less interesting.
It didn't really need a multiplayer, to be honest.
It did feel, bolted on, to be honest. Then in 2014... they released Thief. Now, this was basically another reboot to a classic series. I can see the thinking. So they've released Deus Ex Human Revolution, an absolutely fantastic updating of a classic original. I nearly said classic series then, but actually only the first one is really considered a classic, to be honest. So, hey, let's bottle lightning. Let's do it again. Well, they didn't. It scored 70% critic average on Metacritic.
Which is a bit generous, to be honest.
Well, as is evidenced by the user average, which is 58%.
Big difference. It's always worrying when there's such a big difference in user rating.
Absolutely. Thief is a game where obviously you play as a thief. It's a first-person perspective game where it's kind of set in an alternate version of history, and the reboot just failed on so many levels. It's actually hard to know where to begin. It was boring. It was a draw rifling simulator, actually, and even worse, a game called Dishonored actually did the whole Thief bag a million times better several years previously. Now, in 2015, Eidos Montreal were responsible for Rise of the Tomb Raider. It scored 86% on Metacritic, only 81% in terms of user ratings. The thing with Rise of the Tomb Raider, it did contain some improvements out of its over its previous version. Not enough change, really, and it was also something that we pointed out a lot at the time. It was held back by the fact that there are last-gen versions. As long as they're making versions for the 360 that are essentially the same game but with a graphical downscale, then you're going to hold the game back mechanically.
And you could tell.
You really could tell when you're playing it. Yes, it did feel like a sort of up-resed last-gen game, really. So that brings us to 2016 and Deus Ex Mankind Divided. I have to say, although there have been the odd misstep, Thief being by far the biggest misstep, although the Tomb Raider multiplayer isn't really that far behind it, to be honest, there are some pretty big hitters on that list. I mean, Rise of the Tomb Raider is not an insignificant achievement, and of course, Deus Ex, which did such a good job of bringing a classic series up to date. It looked fantastic. The colour palettes, for my eyes, it did actually get some criticism for the colour palette, but to my eyes, the colour palette was fantastic. It was futuristic. It was
very Blade Runner-esque, wasn't it?
Exactly very much like Blade Runner.
Game you just love.
Yes, absolutely, but that sort of gold colour palette just sort of differentiated it enough to be its own thing. And there's also actually a very good tie-in novel. Now, normally gaming tie-in novels are pure garbage, but the one for Deus Ex Human Revolution was actually pretty good fun, actually. So what is Mankind Divided? Well, first of all, it's going to be released on the 23rd of August. It has been beset by some pretty hefty delays. I think it's one of those situations where they probably announced a bit too early, and it's a massive game. It's been in development for a long time as well. It's a first-person adventure / RPG / shooter with elements of third-person cover shooting in as well.
And can be played as a stealth game as well.
Of course, yes. So that's where the first-person adventure part comes in. And of course, so it's although it sounds like a mishmash of genres, it's not until you play it that you actually realise how well it actually blends all of these elements. I mean, it's true that obviously the boss battles thing was a big problem with the first They did actually fix this in a director's cut version, although they did make that a charged upgrade rather than just giving it away to anyone who had the original. But they have promised that this time around, they're not going to balls up the bosses. The entire game can be kill-free this time. So anyone who had a massive problem with that should feel some relief at that. Adam Jensen is back. He was the main character in the first game. He's a really good character, actually. I suppose he's quite stereotypical. He's the almost stereotypical cyberpunk, future detective, where he's got his sunglasses on, even though it's perma-night in the city. And he's got all his augmented limbs and body parts and so forth that basically, that feeds into the tech tree as well when it comes to upgrading your character. And because it's 2 years later, there's going to be this conflict in the game world around augmented humans. So there's going to be an issue where there's sort of distrust of people, even though it's quite commonplace to have
augmented body parts.
Exactly, yeah. There's this mistrust amongst people who haven't had any of those, and so it's sort of creating two different communities,
right.
the haves and the have-nots, I guess, and it's almost bubbling up into a form of civil war. I mentioned it's been in development a long time. It's actually been in development for 5 years.
That is quite a long time.
It's a long time. I'm really pleased to see games like this that have had a long time spent on them.
Not enough games these days have had enough time spent on them, which is quite evident.
It's true. Some games have arguably had a little too long spent on them, as was the case with Fallout 4, which I still maintain felt slightly dated upon release. But it's really good that they haven't done a quick job of it. Deus Ex, I should actually probably point out, if you haven't played it, first of all, I'd recommend the PC version, because the predominantly first-person perspective really works well with the mouse and keyboard. And secondly, if you're big into gaming as an experience and to experience the story, like I am, rather than for the competitive aspect, you can run a trainer which will allow you to get all the mods and all the upgrades and, basically be immune from harm. And you can just literally run through the game, just living the story. You don't miss out on anything because all your tech tree is upgraded. I would say, if you haven't played it, it's a really good, and you don't mind, cheating, I suppose. It's a really, actually good, fun, fulfilling way to play the game.
There is some games what trainers suit and what trainers don't suit, and I'd say Deus Ex is one of them.
Absolutely, because of that really strong narrative element and the great story, the fantastic atmosphere. I will be happy, to be honest, if Mankind Divided just serves up a big slice of more of the same thing.
Just with the fixed boss battles.
Just with boss battles that aren't a giant mess like they were in the first game. And, perhaps a bit more weapon variety as well. That was probably one of the most disappointing aspects of the original game. When you've got a game that's set in the future, that is your license to go crazy with the weapons, basically. Nothing's off the table, but in this... There's one sort of stun gun that seemed inspired by Minority Report, but that was about as futuristic as the weapons got. I want to see a bit more in that respect. So my question to you is: Deus Ex Mankind Divided, will it be shit?
I think that's quite a low chance considering how well they did Human Revolution, and with upgrades and fixes of the boss battles, I think it'll be about 20%.
20% chance that it'll be shit, so that's a really low chance. And the only reason, to be honest, that it's as high as 20% is because Eidos Montreal have had some fairly hefty missteps in their career.
If we had to say one reason why it's as high as 20%, Thief.
Yeah, Thief. But I'd like,
says it all.
Yeah, I'd like, the long development time, the fact that, the director's cut of Human Revolution showed that they understood the feedback about the boss battles. It's a fantastic game world.
Lovely setting.
All you need is more of the same. Just let those graphics wash over you. I'll be happy with that, and I think there's a really good chance that that's what we're going to get.
And maybe not to make another Thief game.
Yeah, maybe leave Thief alone. If you enjoyed this video, do please hit the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you ever so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.